Hey, this is Annex, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I set up my drum rack in Ableton Live. And yeah, I'm usually always talking about the session view. So today I'm going to be talking again about the drum rack setup in session view and also how that relates to the push. And I'm also in this video going to introduce some of the devices and the plugins I have on my device chain, on my audio chain, because that influences the way that the sound comes out of the instruments that you put on your drum rack. And in Ableton, it's especially relevant because of the groupings. So you can put these audio devices on different groups, and that influences to what thing it's affecting, to what sound specifically and what input specifically is going to affect. So let's just get started here. I'm going to try to make this tutorial a little shorter than the last ones I did because I think those went pretty long. So this is the third live set I did. It's called Live Setets number 3. It's also on my YouTube channel as a video if you want to see me play through it. I think I posted it on one of the Ableton forums a while ago. It's in red and green because it was Christmas. But I wouldn't recommend actually, if you're doing like a real live performance, I wouldn't recommend you making everything in the same 2 colors or the same 3 colors because it's not that easy to color coordinate with only 3 different options. I mean, to actually have a system where you associate the color of something with the thing it's playing. So here I did just basically green first and then red in that pattern, but then if I had glitches or if I had sound effects, I made them purple. But usually I do my bass in green, my percussion is bright yellow, the vocals are pink. Higher end instruments like this music box or bells would be blue, and I just have a mental system in my head for how I go through it. And my kicks are always bright red. So now when I look at this, I think, okay, everything should be a kick, but it's not. So color coordinate your stuff. I'm not going to go through and play this because that's not the point of this tutorial. So I'll show you the relevant sections I have set up. So I have my, stop that. So I have stabs here. These are just basically hits on a 1, 2, 3, 4 count. And since I made this, I got another session I bought another version of FabFilter, so that's why you see these disabled. But here I had an EQ from FabFilter. I had FabFilter Q, and I also had a couple limiters. So FabFilter L I had on this track. And usually when you see those disappear on my tracks, that's what it is. So it's usually an EQ and a limiter of some type, at least in this file. Okay, so this is just my stabs. I'm not going to talk about that much. It's an audio sample. It's audio that I recorded from, I think, that one of the Heaviosity VSTs, and that's something you can get in a contact library, and it has a nice industrial feel, which is what I was going for in this tutorial. Okay, so this column, this track is my stabs, and maybe just to take a step back, I went over in my first tutorial about how I group tracks or group songs in my live set. So if you want to learn more about that, go to my first tutorial video. So here we see again, this is a different file, this is a different project, but the same idea. So I have my 5 songs at the top, and they're all grouped, and they have a number of tracks within them. And when we go to arrangement view, we see how they look this way. So this is actually how it recorded when I played. So it records from left to right, and it records everything that I'm triggering here on the push, and everything I'm triggering here on the push is what you see happening on the top right. So I'm going to trigger these master sessions, if you will, unless it's sound effects or other things. Okay, so this first track is stabs, and the second one, which is the one we're going to focus on, this is my drum rack, and I usually put all my things, so all my percussion that's not the kick, on my drum rack. And by the kick, I mean the talk, like the attack, and the tail end of that. So those I have usually on the last track in my group. because it helps me structure that way, because the kicks really shape the form of the song. So I have, see, look on this master session column, I have the name of the song first. So this is the number 1 song, Go Back to Sleep. It mirrors what's happening up here. And then I have notes for myself. So if we go down in the columns, so as we go down, it's either trigger. So trigger would mean I want to push it or not. When it's kicks, I know the kicks are I'm gonna trigger a kick, because I wouldn't just go in and kind of do it at a random time. And when it's X here, and sometimes in newer projects I call it FX, then I'm not going to trigger it. I'm gonna layer a sound effect on top of it by going in one of these buttons specifically. Just as an example, so if this is playing, great. So then I can go in and find this here. So this, I can trigger the sound effect over top. Anyway, I'll talk about that in another tutorial if you're interested. So that's just what these mean over here. I also mark my risers, so I can time how I'm getting to the kick. And I know each of these kicks here is, well, it says 16 bars, but it should be 8 bars each, because then I have 8 bars times 4 for a group of 32 kicks, which is typical in EDM and electronic music. Okay, so I went over, there's these stabs here. There's the drum rack. There's again something I recorded from the Heaviosity. So this is recording from MIDI into audio with a contact library. This is like an upper end. Oops, sorry. This is a melody line that I again recorded, but this is from Omnisphere. And this is just some ambience. So this is to add a little bit of motion and a little bit of atmosphere. And I can go in and do either one at a time like this, or I could do multiple ones at a time like here. Or I can combine like here with here. Anyway, but when I put them in a group and I collapse them, then I don't have to go in one by one. I can just trigger the session clip on the one group. And here, that session clip would be here. So when I press this, it plays all of this row. Okay, so I showed you pretty much what's going on within this group here, within this one song, and also within groups within my groups. So I'm going to close these. And this last group here is just the sound effects that I mentioned. And it's doubled up here. These are just duplicate versions of each other. And that just makes the waveform a little thicker. And when it's thicker, it's more pronounced in the song. And because this is quite a heavy industrial song where I wanted the I wanted the glitches to be really pronounced. So that's why I doubled them here. The glitches in the crow. Also there's screeches and like a second glitch anyway. So this way, when they're doubled up here, it has a stronger waveform and it's more pronounced over other layers. And also in some layers, I think like for this ambience, I can put like a sidechain compression on it and then have this glitch feed into it. And what that does is every time this glitch plays, it'll duck, so it'll reduce the signal in this ambience so we can hear the glitches more. That just is so that its frequencies don't overlap with each other, and this becomes more pronounced and everything's a bit more clear. Okay, so the purpose of this is to talk about the drum rack. So I'm going to open that up, and this is all my percussion except for my kick, which I showed you is on another track here. So a drum rack you just set up by, you go insert MIDI track, and you go over to the instruments here, and you see this drum rack, and you just basically pull it on, and it loads up a drum rack for you. And I like to start with an empty drum rack because there's none of the presets in Ableton that really suit the mood of my songs that I want. I mean, none of the preloaded drum kits, although there are a lot with a lot of different feels, so you can see what you like in those. So I already did that on this track. So I started a new MIDI track and I dropped in a drum kit. And the next thing I do is fill it up with things. So let me pull this up a little bit, or not, okay. So first I fill it up with the higher level things. So I have my open hi-hat and I have my closed hi-hat. And in a lot of songs, I do the closed on every 4 beats. So okay, an open and a closed hi-hat, they sound different because open has a lot more wobbling going on. So if you hit it, it's a lot more resonant at the end. Whereas a closed, it's closer together, so it has less noise that's bouncing between these two plates for less time. So the open one, I would only do like every 1 bar, every 2 bars, or usually that. But the closed one, I would do on every quarter or half bar. So that's why I have both of these. They both serve a purpose. I don't play them at the same time, I think. So, okay, and then after this, I have a crash. So this crash is like it's like a cymbal, but more, here, I'll play it for you. Yeah, it's something that introduces the next section or tells you that we're going to start something new. It kind of gets your attention and gets you focused on the new thing that's coming. This open hi-hat, that's what it sounds like. And this is just one of the Cashmere clips. So Cashmere has really good audio effects that you can buy. And he has 3 different versions. And they're really great. And he put a lot of time into them. And I highly recommend them because I think they're only like 20 euros per thing. This is the hi-hat, the closed hi-hats. And here I use the one for Ableton Live Max 10. So it comes with these instruments here, which I really like. So once you have Max for Live, then this option opens up to you. And then you can load on Max instruments like this. And this is the DS hi-hat. So I just pull on this one. And here you can adjust it completely. So you can make it an open hi-hat, a closed hi-hat. If the K is longer, it's like a open hi-hat. And if it's shorter, it's more closed. And then I usually like to pitch it to so it's a complementary tone to the scale that I chose. This one is in G minor, so it would be in something that sounds good with that. It doesn't tell you exactly what the pitch is, but you can use your ears, or you could use something like G-Tune. It's a VST, it's free. You can put it after this in your chain, and it'll tell you which note it's hitting. But eventually you can hear it yourself, or just go back and forth to a piano instrument to check it, to see if they sound the same when you play them. So on the push now, I'm in my session view. Sorry, I'm in my note view. So before we had this session view. So this is what we're seeing here. We're seeing this red box up at the top is mirrored on the push here. So this is my stabs, this is my percussion, this is my vocal track. And I really wish they were different colors, but anyway. So this is the percussion track, and you see all these different groups. They're not groups, they're objects that we loaded on the drum rack. You see them as kind of columns underneath it, so you can collapse them or open them up as you want. The benefit of opening them up this way is to double check that you have things on the right item. because sometimes you have groups within groups within groups. So like when you're on the drum rack here, I'm going down after I clicked on the main percussion group here. If I scroll to the right, these are some of the effects I have on my chain. And when these effects are not in this group, they affect everything on the drum kit equally. But if we pull it in here, then it's going to affect only this sample. And if we, okay, so this sample is in a group, but I'll show you how you can add it to groups specifically in a second. Okay, so I start up with the hi-hats here, and on my push, I'm gonna go to note, and this note here, so this 4x4, or 3x4, I guess it should be, yes, 4x4, I just didn't load up the fourth column here. This is what you see your drum rack. So this is exactly the same as here. And you see these spots are empty because I didn't load anything up. So if I press them, it doesn't do anything, or it stops what's already playing. Depending on, yeah, you can add instruments in a way that starting one stops the other one, and that's called adjusting the choke, I think. And it's important when you're building it yourself to think about the relationship between the different percussion instruments on your drum rack, and then adjust them accordingly to if you want them to cut over each other or not. So I have my my hi-hats here. I have crashes, I have a clap, and the way I can play this on the push is just go down and simply press the right button here. This is also a push from the Max 10, Ableton Live Max 10, whatever, and you adjust it the same. So if the decay is longer, it sounds like that. If it's shorter, it's like that. That's the tune. And then we can go down further. So then I have my, oh, that's really loud. Then I have my snares. Oh, that's my cymbal. Here's my snares. See so I'm scrolling my mouse down, you can't see it, but I'm just scrolling like this on my mouse, and it scrolls down one row at a time on your drum rack. And you can also do that on the left here. You can pull it up and down, and it just goes, this is what you see here. You're going up and down through the various 4x4 boxes that you see on your drum rack. So we have snare 1, snare 2, some other crazy snare, and scrolling down again. Then I have kind of risers and fallers, I guess. So these are fills, and these they can be white noise, or they can be kind of atonal noise, or just very soft elements that they shape your song, and it helps you tell the listener, at least subconsciously, if you're building energy, if you're releasing energy, where you want the mood to be going in general, in a way that supports how your instruments and how your melody is developing. So you can click on these, each of these little elements here, and it opens up what it looks like on the right, and it also shows you on the push on top, and you can adjust things with the sample on the push, but that's not what I'll focus on today. So we have these risers and fallers. That one, oh yeah, that one's a little longer. And I also have some things like glitches on here, because then if I want them to appear regularly in any of these clips, I can just do it as a little MIDI key, which I'll show you in a sec. So I have riser bars here. So a riser will always go, it'll get bigger from left to right because you're getting bigger over time. And then I have the down sweeps here. Okay. Oops. And when I'm playing the percussion, I like to set the accent bar. I like to press this button, this accent button, because when it's on, it records all velocities 100%. So it records everything as 127 velocity, which is the max. And the percussion, I don't want it to be sensitive to my presses. Some people do. I just like to go in and do it by hand afterwards, so it's more standardized, but still loud overall. Okay, so that's my drum rack. I have the open hi-hats, the crashes, the snares, the exhaust and my sound effects, the uprise, and the down sweep. And I'll show you what's on my chain here. It's a good example. So on this snare here, if I double click, so this chain, it shows you, it's not in order of the clips on your drum rack, but you can readjust it. So it doesn't correspond to the order that's over here, it's just the order that you prefer. So it shows you each of the chains, each of the elements, and a chain means that you link something with something else with something else. And it's kind of like you're linking something within something within something within something. So it's like an inception of groups, if you will. So I'll open the, where was I? I'll open the snare for you here. Oops. And it shows me the sample. And I have my sample here. It says, this is in the simpler. It's an instrument I talked about in the last tutorial. And it says a one shot, so it means it's not looping. And because it's on the drum rack, it's not going to be pitching because these notes only correspond to setting this instrument on or off. They don't correspond to a particular note or a particular key. And here, because I know this sample is 200 beats per minute, I don't have to warp it because it already lines up to the beats that I want. But if I didn't know what the tempo of this sample was, or I wanted to change it to the tempo of my song, then you would go warp and it puts it over the bars, it puts it over beats instead of time. It's a good practice to do this anyway, to warp things, but be careful about which way you warp it, because some things like kicks and percussion especially, they can sound pretty bad if you warp it the wrong way. Complex is a more safe way to warp, but for kicks I use tones, and for some percussive elements like texture is better. You just have to play with it and see what sounds good. It automatically puts the volume at -12. That's way too quiet for me, obviously. So I just take it up and I hear what it sounds like to fix it the way I want. After this, I have an EQ. So this is just an EQ shapes the frequency of the sound that's coming through it. So it takes this sound as an output and goes through this EQ. I think it's equalizer. So it's modifying how equal it is over the different frequency bands. So going from very low to very high. And over here it's the bass, and over here it's the treble. And if you're new to this, you should do some research and read about which instruments sound best in which of these ranges. And then you can go in and adapt them to accentuate the best parts of that instrument and what you want to bring out. So for the snare, it sounds nice at, I think 100, it's about 200 here, so I want to bring out the 200 hertz and I make a little bump. And then here I want to bring out again at 6,230 hertz or something around here. Ableton has nice presets for this, so you can go down to audio effects and you go on to EQ8 and drums, and you can pull on one of these, snare 1, 2, or 3, see which one sounds the best, and then tweak it for your particular sound that you want. After this, I have a gate. So notice that this isn't on the group with the snare anymore. This is after. So as I mentioned, it'll affect this drum rack. All of these things affect the drum rack, everything on the drum rack that I play all the time. It doesn't just affect the snare. So this is a gate. This is the FabFilter that I use. I started with a preset on snare it. So a gate means when a signal comes below a certain volume, so a certain decibel threshold, it's going to cut it off and make it silent. It's the opposite of a limiter. So a limiter looks at how high the volume is going, how high the decibels are going, and it cuts it off at the top. So a gate does the same, but at the bottom. So this helps to stop your percussion and your drums from bleeding through to the next sound. So bleeding is when you have I think the transients persist a little more in time than is intended. And it just gets things quite messy if it bleeds through. So if I play you something here. So you see the threshold, if I set it all the way up, it cuts off everything. If I set it all the way down, it cuts off nothing. So it's a matter of finding a balance between the amounts of transients you want to hear and how quickly you want to cut them off. And also if you want to leave a little bit at the bottom so it's more natural. But for this hardcore, Frenchcore, industrial stuff, it's really fast and it's really a hard knee, it's called. So this angle is really sharp. So you're going to hear it be like bang, bang, bang. It's not a subtle cutoff. And it's a hard ratio too. Because otherwise you have so much going on, it would just be a complete mess. So you have to be really tight and specific about the elements you're using. Okay, so that's the gate that I use. And then I also like to throw on this glue compressor. And again, this is a Ableton preset I start with. And they're not under compressor, they're under glue compressor. So there's two different types of compressors apparently. And all of these things under here are presets, so it's not a different effect, it's just a preset. And I like the rock parallel room for percussion. And the compressor is like a limiter. So again, kind of like the opposite of a gate. It looks at how high the decibels are going in the audio that's coming through. And you set the threshold that you want it to start compressing under. So when we have the audio file, the audio sample, we have the main sound that we hear, and then we have the transients. And in my last video, I talked about the transients as being like the peaks. So when you're compressing, you're squishing the transients. And you do that because you perceive loudness, you perceive more loudness when the audio sample is more compressed, when the transients are more compressed. So where the difference from the lowest signal to the highest signal is smaller, you perceive it as a louder sound. So that's why I use this compressor. It has a high compression ratio. It has a short attack and a short release. And the threshold is also quite low. So if we play it here. So if the threshold is too low, we won't hear the instrument at all. And if it's too high, it does nothing. So, I'll play that again. So about 17 here, it starts to be doing it starts to be applicable to where we want it to turn on to trigger. And the makeup just says how many decibels you want to increase after compressing it. Because also when you compress, it makes it quieter, ironically. So you perceive it as louder, but it makes it quieter. So to make up for that, to compensate, you literally change the makeup button. And this dry versus wet here is what is the proportion of this compressor. So imagine you have two streams of audio coming into this compressor. And you have the dry stream, which is unaffected by the compressor, it doesn't touch it, and you have the wet stream, which the compressor actually applies to. And the percentage of dry versus wet means how much of those, so if those two streams are considered 100%, how much of that would you consider compressed and how much would you consider non-compressed? And it's a nice way to use, not 100% wet, because it's the same idea as like parallel or New York compression, I think it's called, where you just combine the dry and the wet streams, and it's a lot nicer sound. Last thing I have on here is a auto pan. So panning is how much you go from left to right. So when you have a stereo image, you have this whole world that's going around you. If you think of someone kind of standing, if you think of a DJ or something standing at a stage, that's the center, and then you have the audience all the way around them. The audience is kind of like the stereo image. So the stereo image goes all the way from left to right and like in a circle. And panning is what you see here. Oh, what you should see here. So here is the pan per track. So you see on the bottom of my screen, it says track panning. This is center. When I push it down and move to the left, it's moving the signal over to the left-hand side, so to my left ear more. And when I pull it to the right, it's moving to my right ear more. And this would be, so 50 to the right is I only hear to my right ear, 50 to the left is I only hear to my left ear, and center is I hear it balanced. But because I want my little percussive elements and my sound effects to have a little more movement, I put in an auto pan, and this means I don't have to apply it to the whole drum rack. I can choose how much of the panning I want, so it's from 0 to completely. I can change the phase, so if it's 180 degrees, nothing is going to throw itself off because the waveforms intersect at 0. But if I change my phase here, they no longer intersect at 0. So you're going to have some irregularities if you're at a phase that's not 0, not 360, and not 180. It just depends what you want. Yeah, I won't go more into the auto pan. It's interesting here, you can apply it to effects specifically. Let me show you, this is one last thing. So if I have my hi-hat here, and I'm gonna go over to a pan. Where is that? Search for that. So auto pan, and I'm gonna pull it onto this instrument rack, and this instrument rack is for my open hi-hat. Well, I actually would do it on my closed hi-hat, but anyway. So the open hi-hat can also be a little pan. So we open up this chain here, and that's where it's dropped the auto pan. And the chain means it's going to start from up here for my 2 layers of hi-hats to this compressor I had on, and this auto pan. So then let me find that in my drum rack. And it's nice here because it also changes the view for you. So depending on which element in your drum rack you're pressing, you see it change on the screen in session view. So we're working with the open cymbals, and let's go repeats on the push and say I want it repeating every quarter note, because that's what's on here. Let me turn this off. So I'm applying this just to this open hi-hat, and this is with no pan. And actually I would make the gate a little sharper here. See, that's going to tighten it up if I move the threshold higher, because we don't want all of that kind of resonance to bleed through, and when you pan it, it's going to bleed exponentially more. So you want to make sure it's cut off as much as you want. Then I'm going to increase my panning. And you should hear it going from the left to the right side. You aren't right now for some reason. Let me try it here. Yeah, so this one's working. This is 100% panning, and this is no panning. This might make you a little crazy, but if you want a little movement, you could maybe set it like this so you're not so distracted by the panning in your hi-hats. And this determines how frequently it does that over a period of time. And this is kind of nice. If it's an uneven number of loops here, it's gonna hit like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's gonna hit on different ears. But if it's an equal number, like increments, or an even number, like increments of 2, 4, 6, 8, then it's gonna be balanced all the time. So yeah, that's a little longer again than I wanted to talk, but that is how I set up my drum rack in Ableton in session view. It's how I add hi-hats, crashes, snares, risers, fallers, and yeah, some glitches. It's how I see my chains here, and I double up my samples on the chains for a thicker feel. Then after the instrument here, so this puts it in as a simpler in the drum rack because it's an instrument. Then I put in an EQ to shape the frequency. I have a compressor. So after the signal to stop to make the difference from the lowest to the highest waveform peaks on that sample. And then I apply a gate to cut off the bottom, the lower part, so it doesn't bleed into the next. I apply a parallel compressor to the whole drum rack, so it's a more consolidated feel. And I influence the dry or the wet signal to mix it using parallel or New York compression, and then I apply an auto pan at a certain rate, depending on the feel I'm going for. Okay, so I hope you found this useful. Let me know in a comment below if you want to learn anything else about electronic music production or hardcore French core production, and maybe I can help you with it. Thanks.